I need to tell you about the day I learned that telling the truth doesn't matter when the person calling you a liar has a PhD and you're just 17 years old. My chemistry teacher stood in front of the entire class and called me a fraud, said I'd fabricated my data, destroyed my project, blocked me from competition, filed a report that followed me for years, and the worst part? I'd done everything right. My work was solid, my results were real, but he had a son to protect, and I was in the way. That was 20 years ago. Last month, he came to my office, not as a teacher, not as an authority figure, as someone begging for a job, because I'd just finished inspecting his facilities. And I'd found something interesting. This is that story. I need to tell you about something that happened to me. Not because I'm looking for sympathy or validation. I stopped needing either of those things, long time ago. I'm telling you because sometimes you need to say it out loud to understand what you've become. I was 17 when I learned that the truth doesn't matter if the person telling the lie has more authority than you do. Let me start at the beginning, before everything went wrong, before I understood how the world actually works. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and Friday night football games are the only thing that matters to most people. My parents ran a hardware store on Main Street. Nothing fancy, just the kind of place contractors went for supplies and homeowners came for advice on fixing a leaky faucet. They worked 6 days a week, every week, for as long as I could remember. I was their only kid, quiet, a little too serious for my age, my mom used to say. While other kids were outside playing basketball or getting into trouble, I was usually in my room reading or down in our basement trying to figure out how things worked. I'd take apart old radios, broken appliances, anything my dad brought home from the store that was destined for the trash. Sometimes I could fix them. Sometimes I just wanted to understand why they'd stopped working. Chemistry found me when I was 15. Mr. Holland, our sophomore chemistry teacher, did this demonstration on the first day of class where he mixed two clear liquids and they turned bright blue, then yellow, then suddenly crystallized into this geometric structure that looked like something from another planet. Everyone else in class was just watching, mildly interested, but I felt something click in my brain. That moment when you realize there's an entire invisible architecture to reality, rules governing everything, and if you learn those rules, you can predict, control, manipulate outcomes. I was hooked. I started spending lunch periods in the chemistry lab. Mr. Holland would let me use the equipment if I cleaned up after myself. I'd run simple experiments from the textbook, then slightly more complex ones, then experiments I designed myself based on things I'd read in the library. Nothing dangerous. I wasn't trying to blow anything up. I just wanted to understand reaction rates, equilibrium states, how different catalysts changed outcomes. By junior year, I was better at chemistry than most of the seniors. Mr. Holland told me I had natural intuition for it, which felt like the best compliment I'd ever received. He suggested I enter the state science competition, said, with my skills and work ethic, I might actually have a shot at nationals. That's when I met Darren Wallace. Mr. Wallace transferred to our school at the start of my junior year. He'd been teaching at some private academy in Philadelphia, but there'd been administrative changes. That's all anyone said about why he'd left. He was in his late 40s, tall, always wore pressed shirts and these expensive-looking ties. He had this way of speaking that made everything sound authoritative, final, like his words were facts handed down from some higher source. The school administration loved him. He had a PhD in chemistry from Penn State. He'd published actual research papers. He knew people at universities, had connections in the science education world. Within a month of arriving, he'd reorganized the entire chemistry program, brought in new lab equipment through some grant he'd secured, started an after-school chemistry club that met twice a week. Everyone thought we were lucky to have him. He taught AP chemistry, which I enrolled in that fall. The first day of class, he spent an hour telling us about the standards of excellence he expected. How chemistry wasn't just about memorizing formulas. It was about rigorous methodology, reproducible results, intellectual honesty. How in the real world of science, your reputation was everything, and one act of dishonesty could destroy a career you'd spent decades building. Anyone can claim they've discovered something, he said, walking between the lab benches with his hands clasped behind his back. But in science, claims without evidence are worse than ignorance. They're poison. They corrupt the entire enterprise. I remember thinking he was right. That's what I loved about chemistry. It was objective. It didn't care about your opinion or your feelings. Either your results were reproducible or they weren't. I had no idea he'd use those exact words against me 6 months later. The state science competition allowed individual or group projects in any STEM field. I'd been working on something for months, ever since Mr. Holland had first mentioned the competition to me. It started as a simple question. Could you create a low-cost water filtration system using locally available materials that would be effective enough to remove common contaminants? I know that sounds ambitious for a high school junior, but I'd broken it down into manageable pieces. I researched existing filtration methods, identified the chemical principles that made them work, then experimented with different combinations of sand, gravel, activated charcoal I made myself from hardwood, and a few other components I could source cheaply. I built prototypes in my basement, tested them with water samples I'd contaminated with known substances, refined the design based on the results. It took me 7 months. I filled 3 notebooks with observations, measurements, iterations. I tested it with different water sources, tap water, creek water, even collected rainwater. I documented everything: pH levels before and after filtration, presence of common bacteria, turbidity measurements, chemical composition. The results were better than I'd expected. Not perfect, it wouldn't remove every possible contaminant, but for common issues like sediment, chlorine, some bacteria, and basic chemical pollutants, it worked surprisingly well. And the total cost of materials was under $30. I wasn't trying to revolutionize water treatment. I just wanted to build something that worked, understand why it worked, and present data that proved it worked. Mr. Holland was enthusiastic when I showed him my preliminary results. He helped me refine my presentation, suggested a few additional tests I should run, reminded me to keep detailed records of everything. This is exactly the kind of practical, well-documented project that does well at competition, he told me. You're not making wild claims. You're showing a clear methodology and reproducible results. That's what judges respect. I submitted my application in January. The regional competition was in March. That's when Mr. Wallace got involved. He announced in class one day that his son, Brett Wallace, who was a senior at a private school 40 minutes away, would be competing in the state science competition. Brett's project involves novel approaches to catalytic efficiency in organic synthesis, he said with obvious pride. He'll be representing his school, but I wanted you all to know that excellence in chemistry runs in our family. A few students congratulated him. I didn't think much of it at the time. Then, 3 weeks before the regional competition, Mr. Wallace asked to see my project. I should have known something was wrong when he called me into his office after class. Not the chemistry lab, his office. He closed the door and sat behind his desk while I stood there with my project binder. I've been hearing about your filtration project, he said. Mr. Holland speaks very highly of it. I'd like to review your methodology before the competition. Make sure everything meets proper scientific standards. It seemed reasonable. He was the department head now. Of course, he'd want to review student projects. I walked him through everything. My initial hypothesis, the research phase, the design iterations, the testing protocols, the results. I showed him my notebooks, my data tables, photographs of the apparatus at different stages, the actual filtration system I'd built. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with what I can only describe as disappointment. "These results," he said, tapping my data table with his pen. "They're too consistent." I didn't understand. "Sir?" "Real experimental data has variation, error margins, outliers. Your numbers are too clean." He flipped through my notebook. "It looks like you've smoothed them, adjusted them to fit your hypothesis." The room suddenly felt very small. "I didn't adjust anything," I said. "Those are the actual measurements." "I'm not questioning your intentions," he interrupted. "Sometimes students get so invested in a project that they unconsciously bias their observations. They see what they want to see. It's a common mistake, especially at your level. But I ran multiple trials. I used calibrated equipment that you accessed without supervision." He closed my notebook. "Mr. Holland mentioned you've been using the lab independently. That's concerning. These measurements require proper oversight to ensure validity." My face was getting hot. "Mr. Holland approved my access. He checked my work. Mr. Holland is a competent teacher, but he's not a research scientist." Mr. Wallace stood up, came around the desk. "Look, I understand you put a lot of work into this, but I'd be failing you as an educator if I let you present questionable data at a regional competition. It would reflect poorly on you, on our school, on the integrity of our science program." I felt like the floor was tilting. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can't in good conscience approve this project for competition." He put his hand on my shoulder. I wanted to shrug it off, but didn't. "I think you should. Withdraw your application. There's no shame in it. You're young, you'll have other opportunities." "But the data is real," I said, and I hated how my voice sounded. Desperate, pleading. "I can show you my process. I can replicate the results right now." "That won't be necessary." He went back to his desk, picked up his phone. "I need to make some calls to the competition organizers. This kind of thing needs to be handled delicately." I stood there, unable to process what was happening. "You can go," he said, not looking at me. I left his office in a daze. In the hallway, I passed Brett Wallace talking to a group of seniors. He was tall like his father, confident, wearing a private school polo shirt. He glanced at me as I walked past, and I swear there was something in that look. A flicker of satisfaction, like he knew exactly what had just happened in that office. I didn't withdraw my application. I thought if I could just explain, if I could show someone else my work, if I could demonstrate the filtration system in person, they'd see that my data was legitimate. I was so fucking naive. 2 days later, Mr. Wallace made an announcement at the start of AP chemistry class. "Before we begin today's lesson, I need to address a serious matter concerning academic integrity." He was standing at the front of the room, and something about his posture made everyone go silent. "As you know, scientific research depends on honesty, on accurate reporting of results. When that trust is violated, it undermines everything we do here." My stomach dropped. I recently reviewed a student project that will be withdrawn from the state science competition due to concerns about data fabrication. He looked directly at me. This wasn't a minor error or a misunderstanding. This was systematic falsification of experimental results to support a predetermined conclusion. The classroom felt like it had no air. "I want to be clear," he continued. "I don't believe this was malicious. I think it was a case of inexperience and poor judgment. But that doesn't make it acceptable. In fact, allowing it to go unchallenged would be a disservice to everyone in this room who conducts honest research." Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes on me, even though Mr. Wallace hadn't said my name. Except he didn't need to say my name. Everyone knew. Everyone had heard about my filtration project. If you're going to pursue science, Mr. Wallace said, you need to understand that your reputation is built on the reliability of your work. One instance of fabricated data, even as a student, can follow you for years. Universities talk to each other. Research communities are smaller than you think. My hands were shaking under my desk. I'm filing an official report with the administration. There will be consequences beyond withdrawal from the competition. That's how seriously we take this. But I want you all to learn from this. Integrity isn't optional in science, it's everything. He turned to the whiteboard and started writing equations for that day's lesson like nothing had happened. I sat there for the entire 50-minute class, unable to focus on a single word. When the bell rang, I gathered my books and tried to leave quickly, but I could hear the whispers starting before I even reached the door. In the hallway, people looked at me differently. Some curious, some pitying, some contemptuous. Crystal Dixon, who sat 2 rows behind me in English class, actually said it out loud. I heard you cheated on your science project. I didn't cheat, I said. She shrugged. That's not what Mr. Wallace said. By the end of the day, it wasn't concerns about methodology anymore. It was, he faked his data. It was, he tried to cheat his way into the competition. It was, Mr. Wallace caught him lying. I tried to fight it. God, I tried. I went to the principal, Mr. Gibson, with my notebooks, my photographs, my actual filtration apparatus. I offered to demonstrate it for him. I explained that I'd documented everything, that Mr. Holland had supervised my work, that my results were reproducible. Mr. Gibson listened politely. He looked through my materials. Then he said, I understand you're upset, but Mr. Wallace has a doctorate in chemistry. He's published in peer-reviewed journals. He's been teaching for over 20 years. I have to trust his professional judgment on this. But he didn't even test it, I said. He just looked at my data and decided it was fake. That's not scientific. This isn't a debate. Mr. Gibson's tone shifted. Mr. Wallace has filed a formal report citing academic dishonesty. That goes in your permanent record. The competition matter is closed. And frankly, if I were you, I'd focus on accepting responsibility rather than making accusations against a respected teacher. I went to Mr. Holland next. He was sympathetic but helpless. I believe you, he said quietly. We were in the chemistry lab after school, and he looked genuinely distressed. I've seen your work. I know how careful you are. But Wallace is department head now. He has authority over curriculum decisions, lab access, everything. If I contradict his assessment, I'm basically calling him incompetent or dishonest, and I can't. I have a family. I need this job. So I'm just supposed to accept being called a fraud. He looked at me with something like pity. Sometimes that's how it works. Sometimes the people with more power get to decide what's true, even when they're wrong. I'm sorry, I really am. But there's nothing I can do. I tried going over everyone's heads. I called the state science competition directly, explained the situation, asked if I could present my project for independent review. The coordinator was sympathetic but firm. Once a school withdraws a student due to integrity concerns, we can't override that. It would create liability issues. I'm sorry, but your school administration has final authority on this matter. I even tried contacting Penn State's chemistry department, thinking maybe someone there could review my work independently, vindicate me somehow. I got a polite email back explaining they couldn't get involved in high school disciplinary matters. Every door I tried to open, I found locked. Meanwhile, Brett Wallace won the regional competition with his organic synthesis project. Advanced to state, placed second. Got his photo in the newspaper. Following in his father's footsteps, the headline said, Mr. Wallace brought copies of the article to class, passed them around with obvious pride. I sat there looking at Brett's smiling face and wanted to throw up. The worst part wasn't the official consequences, the disciplinary report, the permanent record, the blocked competition. The worst part was the doubt. Late at night, alone in my basement with my notebook spread out, I'd go through everything again. My measurements, my protocols, my data, and I'd think, what if he's right? What if I did unconsciously bias my observations? What if I saw patterns that weren't there, dismissed outliers that contradicted my hypothesis, recorded numbers that fit my expectations instead of reality? I'd run the filtration system again, test the water, measure the pH, check for bacterial contamination. The results were consistent with my original data. But then I'd think, I'm the one collecting this data too. How do I know I'm not making the same mistakes? This is what gaslighting does. It makes you question your own perception of reality. Even when you know you're right, even when you have evidence, there's this voice in your head saying, but what if you're not? What if everyone else sees something you're missing? I started second-guessing everything. In other classes, when I'd turn in an assignment, I'd wonder if my reasoning was sound or if I'd fooled myself into thinking I understood something I didn't. When I'd study for tests, I couldn't trust my own judgment about what I knew versus what I only thought I knew. It bled into everything. My grades didn't collapse. I was too disciplined for that. But the confidence, the intuition, the joy I'd felt in learning, that was gone. I stopped going to the chemistry lab during lunch. Stopped reading science journals in the library. Stopped thinking about college programs in chemical engineering or research science. What was the point? If I couldn't trust my own work, if my best effort could be dismissed as fraud by someone with more credentials, what future did I have in a field where credibility was everything? The social consequences were almost as bad. I wasn't popular before. I was the quiet kid who spent lunch in the lab, but I wasn't actively avoided either. After Mr. Wallace's announcement, that changed. Some people were overtly hostile. Troy Chambers, who fancied himself some kind of guardian of school honor, confronted me in the cafeteria one day. "Cheaters make everyone look bad," he said loud enough for half the room to hear. "You should have been expelled." Others were more subtle. They'd just exclude me. Study groups I'd been part of suddenly formed without me. Lab partners requested reassignments. People stopped sitting near me in classes we shared. Even the few friends I'd had started keeping their distance. Not because they thought I was guilty, or maybe they did, I never asked, but because association with me had become socially toxic. Autumn Griffin, who I'd been lab partners with for 2 years, apologized when she requested a different partner for our final chemistry project. "My dad thinks it'll look bad on my college applications if we work together," she said, not meeting my eyes. "After everything that happened." "I didn't do anything wrong," I said. "I know, I believe you, but my dad—" "It's fine," I cut her off, because what else could I say? It wasn't fine, but it was reality. By April, I was eating lunch alone, sitting in the back row of every class, going straight home after school. My parents noticed. They asked what was wrong. I told them a sanitized version, that there'd been a misunderstanding with a teacher, that my competition project had been withdrawn, that things at school were a little tense. They believed me because they trusted me, because they'd never seen me lie or cheat or cut corners. But they couldn't fix it. They didn't have PhDs or connections or authority. They ran a hardware store. What were they going to do? Argue chemistry methodology with Darren Wallace. So I just endured. I woke up, went to school, sat through classes where Mr. Wallace occasionally made pointed comments about maintaining standards and the importance of honest work. Came home, did homework, went to bed, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. I kept thinking it would blow over, that people would move on to other drama, that eventually this would just be a shitty memory I could put behind me. But senior year applications were starting, college prep, future planning, and I had a disciplinary report in my permanent record for academic dishonesty. Mr. Gibson called me into his office in May, 3 weeks before graduation. I wanted to discuss your college plans, he said. I'd already applied to several universities, Penn State for chemical engineering, Pitt, Drexel. I'd had good grades, decent SAT scores, strong letters of recommendation from teachers who'd taught me before Wallace arrived. I need to be honest with you, Mr. Gibson said. The report in your file is going to be a problem. Most universities specifically ask about academic integrity violations. We're required to report them. But I didn't. He held up a hand. What you did or didn't do isn't the point anymore. The point is, there's an official report. Universities see that, they get concerned. They have plenty of applicants without red flags. My chest felt tight. So I'm just supposed to give up on college? I didn't say that. I'm saying you should consider your options carefully. Maybe start at community college, establish a clean record, transfer after 2 years, or look at schools that are less competitive, less likely to reject you over this. Less competitive. He meant lower-tier schools, schools that would accept someone with a cheating allegation. Mr. Wallace mentioned you might consider a different field entirely, Mr. Gibson continued. Something less dependent on laboratory research credentials. He's concerned that even if you do get into a university program, this incident might follow you. Chemistry is a small world. People talk. I understood what he was really saying. Mr. Wallace had already won. He'd poisoned the well, and now the school administration was helping him bury me. Is there anything else? I asked. Mr. Gibson looked uncomfortable. I know this seems unfair, but sometimes we make mistakes we have to live with. The mature thing is to accept the consequences and move forward. I left his office understanding with perfect clarity that there would be no vindication, no apology, no acknowledgement that I'd been wronged. The system had decided I was guilty, and the system was more interested in protecting Darren Wallace's authority than in discovering the truth. I graduated in June, no honors, no awards, no college acceptance letter to Penn State's engineering program. I'd gotten into a state school 3 hours away, not my first choice, not even my third choice, but they'd accepted me with the disciplinary report after I wrote a groveling supplemental essay about learning from mistakes and understanding the importance of integrity. It felt like swallowing poison to write that essay, to implicitly admit guilt for something I hadn't done. But what choice did I have? Graduation day was gray and humid. I sat in the back rows of the folding chairs set up on the football field, listened to speeches about bright futures and limitless potential, watched Brett Wallace accept an award for academic excellence on behalf of his school, special guest in attendance. Mr. Wallace sat in the faculty section, beaming with pride. When they called my name, I walked across the stage, took my diploma, and kept walking. I didn't look at anyone, didn't smile for photos, didn't go to any of the graduation parties happening that night. I went home, changed out of the rented cap and gown, and sat in my basement with my filtration system. I ran it one more time, filled it with contaminated water, let it filter through, tested the output. It worked, just like it had always worked. I sat there looking at the clear water in the beaker and felt something crystallize in my chest. Not anger exactly, something colder, a decision. I would never again allow my future to depend on someone else's approval, someone else's authority, someone else's willingness to tell the truth. If I was going to build anything in my life, it would be on my own terms, under my own control, where nobody could take it away because they had a PhD and I didn't. I didn't know how yet. I didn't have a plan, But I knew I was done with science, done with chemistry, done with any field where credentialing authorities could destroy you with a single false accusation. I didn't go to that state school in the fall. Instead, I got a job. My dad had a friend, Stanley Bates, who ran a construction company in the next town over. Mostly residential work, roofing, foundations, renovations. Stanley needed laborers willing to work hard for decent money. I showed up at 6 a.m. the Monday after graduation and didn't leave until dark. The work was brutal, physically demanding in a way I wasn't prepared for. Carrying shingles up ladders in 90-degree heat, digging foundation trenches, mixing concrete until my shoulders screamed. But there was something clarifying about it. In construction, things either worked or they didn't. A roof either kept water out or it leaked. A foundation was either level or it wasn't. There was no subjective judgment. No authority figure who could look at a perfectly sound wall and declare it inadequate because it threatened his son's reputation. Stanley was fair. He paid what he promised. If you did good work, he told you. If you fucked up, he told you that too, but then he showed you how to fix it. It was honest in a way school had never been. I worked construction for 2 years, saved most of what I made. I was still living at home, paying minimal rent. By the end of the first year, I had $15,000 in the bank. By the end of the second year, $32,000. I got stronger, learned practical skills, how to read blueprints, how to calculate materials, how to spot structural problems before they became catastrophic. And slowly, quietly, I started thinking about the future, again. Not chemistry. That door was closed and I had accepted it, but engineering. Specifically, the kind of engineering that intersected with construction, with safety, with regulation compliance. I'd seen enough shoddy work on job sites to understand that there was a gap in the industry. Contractors cutting corners to save money. Inspectors who were overworked or underqualified, or willing to overlook violations for the right price. Buildings that looked fine but had hidden problems that would show up in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. There were codes, regulations, safety standards, but enforcement was inconsistent. And when something did go wrong, a collapse, a fire, structural failure, the investigations were often inadequate. Someone needed to do that work properly. Someone who understood the technical details, who couldn't be bullied or bribed, who had nothing to prove, except that the work met the required standards. I started researching engineering programs, not prestigious universities. I'd learned that lesson, but accredited programs that would give me the credentials I needed, state schools, night classes, anything that would let me keep working while I studied. I enrolled in community college that fall. Engineering prerequisites, math, physics, technical writing. I worked construction during the day, went to class at night, studied on weekends. It took me 5 years to get my bachelor's degree in civil engineering. 5 years of juggling shifts and assignments, of showing up to class covered in drywall dust, of writing problem sets at midnight after 10-hour workdays. But I did it. No academic dishonesty reports, no red flags, just grades that reflected actual work. I graduated with a 3.7 GPA and 0 debt because I'd paid for everything myself. My first job out of college was with a commercial inspection firm in Philadelphia. They did building code compliance, safety audits, structural assessments for insurance companies. It wasn't glamorous. I was the junior guy. I got the shit assignments, crawl spaces, rooftop equipment, asbestos surveys, but I was good at it. I was thorough. I documented everything. I didn't care if contractors got angry when I flagged violations. I didn't care if building owners complained that I was too strict or interpreting regulations too literally. The regulations existed for reasons. People got hurt when they were ignored. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread. Workers died. I'd spent years having my competence questioned, my integrity attacked, my careful work dismissed as fraudulent. Now I had credentials that nobody could dispute. I had authority backed by state licensing boards and federal safety codes. And I used it. Within 2 years, I had a reputation. Not necessarily a friendly reputation. Contractors hated seeing my name on the inspection roster, but a solid one. Insurance companies specifically requested me for high-risk assessments because they knew I wouldn't miss anything. Building owners sometimes complained, but my reports held up under scrutiny. I never had to retract a finding. Never had to admit I'd made an error, because I was careful, obsessively careful. I double-checked everything. I photographed everything. I kept copies of every regulation I cited. If someone challenged my assessment, I could pull out the relevant building code section and show them exactly where they were in violation. I wasn't making subjective judgments. I was applying objective standards. Nobody could call my work fraudulent. Nobody could dismiss my findings because they didn't like the implications. It felt like power. Not the loud, obvious kind of power, the quiet kind. The kind that meant when I showed up at a construction site, people paid attention. When I identified a hazard, it got fixed. When I wrote unsafe for occupancy on a form, the building stayed empty until the problems were corrected. I was 28 years old, and I'd become someone people couldn't ignore. At 30, I left the inspection firm and started my own company. I'd saved aggressively for years, still lived modestly, drove a used truck, rented a small apartment, invested most of my income. I used that capital to create Reeves Technical Compliance, a specialized auditing company focused on industrial safety and building systems. My niche was the intersection of construction quality and regulatory compliance. I didn't just check if a building met code. I verified that safety systems actually functioned as designed, that materials matched specifications, that installation quality would hold up long term. I hired carefully. No one fresh out of college, only experienced engineers and inspectors who'd proven they couldn't be pressured into overlooking problems. I paid them well, better than the big firms, but made it clear that integrity wasn't negotiable. We built a reputation fast. Insurance companies loved us because we caught problems before they became claims. Municipal agencies used us for high-stakes projects where they needed bulletproof documentation. Corporate clients hired us when they wanted genuine assessments, not rubber stamps. Within 3 years, Reeves Technical Compliance had 15 employees and contracts in 4 states. Within 5 years, we had 30 employees and had expanded into specialized industrial systems, chemical storage facilities, laboratory environments, manufacturing plants with hazardous materials. I was 35 years old. I had money. I had a business that ran profitably. I had professional respect. But I didn't have what I'd really wanted, vindication. The people who'd wronged me, Darren Wallace, the school administration, everyone who'd believed his lies, they had no idea who I'd become. They probably didn't think about me at all, and that should have been enough. I should have been satisfied with building a successful life despite what they'd done to me. But late at night, when I was alone, I'd still think about that day in Mr. Wallace's office. The way he'd looked at my data and called it fabricated. The way he'd destroyed my competition project, my academic future, my reputation, all to clear the path for his son. I'd think about Brett Wallace winning that competition, getting into Penn State's chemistry program, building a career on a foundation his father had cleared by crushing someone else. And I'd feel that cold thing in my chest crystallize a little bit more. I told myself it was enough to have succeeded despite them, but I was lying. The call came on a Tuesday in October. I was in my office reviewing a contract proposal when Kelsey Dixon, my director of operations, knocked on the door. "We got a request from the State Regulatory Commission," she said. They're doing a comprehensive audit of private science education facilities. New safety standards for laboratory environments. Okay, I said. And? They want to know if we're interested in bidding on the inspection contract. It's a big scope, about 40 facilities across Pennsylvania. Schools, private academies, research institutes. They need everything certified within 6 months. Send me the RFP, I said. I'll look at it. She hesitated. One of the facilities on the list is Wallace Academy in Montgomery County. Is that? Send me the RFP, I repeated. When she left, I pulled up the State Commission's website. Wallace Academy, a prestigious private science high school. Founded 12 years ago by Dr. Darren Wallace, former chemistry educator. Known for rigorous STEM curriculum and exceptional college placement rates. I sat there looking at his photograph on the school's website. Older now, gray at the temples, still wearing those expensive ties, still presenting himself as an authority on scientific integrity. I opened a new tab and searched for Brett Wallace. He'd done well for himself. Penn State undergraduate in chemistry, Ph.D. from Johns Hopkins. But instead of academic research, he'd gone into business. He was now Chief Operating Officer of Wallace Scientific Services, a chain of commercial laboratories that provided analytical testing for industrial clients, environmental compliance work, quality control for manufacturing. The company had locations in 5 states, revenue in the tens of millions, major contracts with pharmaceutical companies, chemical manufacturers, state environmental agencies, founded by the Wallace family 10 years ago, rapid expansion, excellent reputation. I clicked through their website, professional, polished, all the right certifications prominently displayed. I pulled up their corporate filings, reviewed their client list, cross-referenced their facility locations. Then I did something I'd gotten very good at over the years. I looked for the gaps, the inconsistencies, the things that didn't quite add up. Wallace Scientific Services had grown fast, very fast. That kind of expansion required serious capital investment, equipment, facilities, personnel, but their early financial disclosures showed relatively modest funding. How had they scaled so quickly? I dug deeper, found news articles about their first major contract, a 5-year deal with a pharmaceutical manufacturer worth $12 million, awarded based on competitive bidding. Except when I looked at the bid evaluation records, Wallace Scientific's proposal had come in below market rate. Significantly below. You can't run high-quality analytical testing below market rate and remain profitable. Not unless you're cutting costs somewhere. I made some calls, contacted people I knew in the industry, asked casual questions about Wallace Scientific's reputation. Most people said positive things, reliable, quick turnaround times, competitive pricing, but one person, a former employee, was less enthusiastic. They're fine if you need basic stuff, she told me, but they cut corners. Equipment maintenance gets deferred. Quality control procedures aren't always followed. Nothing catastrophic, but if I needed accurate results on something important, I wouldn't use them. Why'd you leave? I asked. They kept pushing us to process more samples with the same resources. When I raised concerns about maintaining accuracy, I was told I needed to be a team player, so I found another job. I thanked her for her time. Then I went back to the State Regulatory Commission's RFP. The scope included laboratory facility inspections, safety compliance, equipment verification, documentation review. It included Wallace Academy. It also included 3 Wallace Scientific Services locations within Pennsylvania. I thought about the filtration system I'd built in my basement 17 years ago. The one that worked. The one Mr. Wallace had called fraudulent. I thought about systematic falsification of data to support predetermined conclusions. I thought about how, Scientific research depends on honesty, on accurate reporting, on trust, and I submitted a bid for the contract. We won the bid in November. The state commission liked our track record, our reputation for thoroughness, our documented history of identifying violations that other firms had missed. They also liked that we had no prior relationship with any of the facilities on the audit list, no conflicts of interest, no reason to go easy on anyone. We started work in January. I assigned other facilities to my senior inspectors. They were competent. They knew what to look for. They'd handle those inspections properly. But Wallace Academy and the 3 Wallace Scientific Services locations, those I kept for myself. I didn't tell anyone why. Kelsey raised an eyebrow when she saw my assignment list. Normally, I delegated field work, but she didn't question it. I scheduled Wallace Academy first. The school was impressive, modern building, well-maintained grounds. When I pulled into the parking lot on a cold February morning, students were streaming in from buses and cars, laughing, talking, carrying backpacks and instrument cases. The kind of students who came from families that could afford $35,000 annual tuition. The kind of students whose futures wouldn't be destroyed by a single false accusation because their parents had lawyers and connections and the ability to fight back. I checked in at the main office. The receptionist, Summer Carson, called the facilities manager to escort me. "We've been expecting you," she said pleasantly. "Dr. Wallace wanted me to let you know he's available if you have any questions during your inspection." "That won't be necessary," I said. "I'm here to evaluate the facility, not discuss educational philosophy." The facilities manager, Austin Webb, gave me a tour of the building, classrooms, student common areas, administrative offices. Then we reached the science wing, 3 full-scale chemistry labs, 2 physics labs, a biology lab with live specimen facilities, a separate space for advanced independent research. "Our laboratory program is the centerpiece of the academy," Austin said, with obvious pride. "We have equipment most universities would envy. Dr. Wallace has been very particular about maintaining the highest standards." "I'll need to inspect every piece of equipment," I said. "Verify calibration records, review maintenance logs, test safety systems." "Of course, whatever you need." We started in Chemistry Lab A. The lab was impressive at first glance. Modern fume hoods, spectrophotometers, analytical balances, rows of cabinets with glassware and supplies. I spent 2 hours going through everything. The fume hoods looked good, but when I tested their airflow rates, 3 out of 5 were below minimum safety specifications. Not catastrophically low, but enough to fail compliance. I checked the calibration stickers on the analytical balances. 2 had expired, certifications. Another had never been calibrated. The sticker was a generic service notation with no documentation of actual testing. I reviewed their chemical storage, found incompatible substances stored together, oxidizers near flammables. Nothing immediately dangerous, but clear violations of NFPA guidelines. I documented everything, photographed everything, took measurements. Austin grew increasingly uncomfortable as the inspection progressed. "Some of this might be administrative oversights," he said. "We can get updated calibrations." "That's not my concern," I said. "My job is to document current compliance status. What you do after this report is your decision." We moved to Chemistry Lab B, more of the same. Equipment that looked professional but wasn't properly maintained. Safety systems that were installed but not functionally tested. Documentation that existed but was incomplete or outdated. Nothing egregious enough to shut down the school immediately, but a clear pattern of prioritizing appearance over substance. We were in Chemistry Lab C when Darren Wallace walked in. He was older, gray hair now, reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck, but still tall. still authoritative, still wearing an expensive tie. "Mr. Reeves," he said warmly, extending his hand, "I wanted to personally welcome you to Wallace Academy. We appreciate the thoroughness of your work." I looked at his extended hand. I didn't take it. "Dr. Wallace," I said neutrally. He lowered his hand, confused by the coldness, but trying to maintain professional courtesy. "I understand you're conducting the state-mandated safety audit. I want you to know we've always prided ourselves on maintaining the highest laboratory standards. If you have any questions about our protocols or procedures, I'm happy to provide clarification." "I don't need clarification," I said. "I need to complete my inspection." He blinked. "Of course, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to—" "Mr. Webb," I said to the facilities manager, "I need to see your emergency shower and eye wash station testing records." Austin looked at Dr. Wallace, then at me. I'll get those for you." As he left, Dr. Wallace remained standing there. "Have we met before?" he asked. "You seem familiar." I looked at him directly for the first time. I could tell him, right now. I could watch the recognition dawn on his face, see him realize that the dangerous fraud he'd destroyed 17 years ago was now the person who controlled whether his academy kept its operating license. But that would give him time to prepare. Time to get his story straight. Time to call his lawyers, or his connections, or whatever resources he'd use to build this little empire. "I have a common face," I said. I turned back to my inspection checklist. He stood there for another moment, then left. I spent 3 days at Wallace Academy. I inspected every laboratory, every piece of equipment, every safety system, every storage area. I interviewed staff, reviewed training records, checked emergency protocols. I found violations everywhere, not dramatic failures, not things that would make headlines, but systematic negligence, the kind that comes from cutting corners consistently over years. Fume hoods that weren't tested properly, fire suppression systems that were installed but never verified, chemical storage that violated basic safety segregation principles, equipment calibration that was documented but not actually performed, emergency showers that would fail inspection if anyone bothered to test them. The academy looked impressive. It sounded impressive when Dr. Wallace gave tours to prospective parents. But the actual safety infrastructure, the boring, unglamorous work of maintaining laboratory standards, had been neglected because it was expensive, because it required constant attention, because nobody would notice unless something went wrong, or unless someone like me showed up to actually check. I documented everything in excruciating detail, photographs with measurement data overlaid, equipment serial numbers cross-referenced with calibration records, time-coded videos of safety system testing. When I finished, I had a 247-page inspection report. I submitted it to the State Commission without editorializing. Just facts, measurements, regulatory citations. The report spoke for itself. Next, I inspected the 3 Wallace Scientific Services locations in Pennsylvania. The company's flagship facility was in King of Prussia, a modern laboratory building that handled pharmaceutical testing, environmental analysis, and quality control work for industrial clients. Brett Wallace met me in the lobby. He was 34 now, confident, well-dressed in a way that suggested success without being ostentatious. He shook my hand firmly and smiled. "Mr. Reeves, thanks for making time for this inspection. We've been meaning to get a comprehensive third-party audit anyway, so this works out perfectly." "This isn't optional," I said. "It's a state-mandated compliance verification." "Right, of course. I just meant we're happy to cooperate. Full transparency, whatever you need to see." He gave me a tour personally, showed me the analytical equipment, the sample processing areas, the quality control procedures, talked about their growth, their client base, their commitment to accuracy. He was good at this. Personable, knowledgeable enough to sound credible without getting too deep into technical details. I let him talk. Then I started the actual inspection. The facility was larger than the academy, but the problems were similar. Equipment that looked professional, but wasn't maintained properly. Calibration records that existed on paper, but didn't match actual instrument performance when I tested them. In the environmental analysis section, I found 3 gas chromatographs that were supposedly calibrated monthly, but when I ran verification standards through them, the results were outside acceptable error margins. That's strange, the lab supervisor, Trent Powell, said when I showed him the data. We just calibrated those last week. Show me the calibration records. He pulled up a spreadsheet. Dates, instrument IDs, technician initials. Everything looked proper on paper. And the standard solutions used for calibration, I asked? We keep them in the reference materials refrigerator. I followed him to the storage area, found the standards, checked their expiration dates. 2 of them had expired 4 months ago. These are out of date, I said. Trent looked genuinely surprised. We must have grabbed the wrong ones. We have fresh standards in the main storage, but these are the ones in your active use area. These are what you're using for calibration. He didn't have an answer for that. I documented it, moved on. In the pharmaceutical testing section, I found sample processing protocols that were supposed to include specific quality control checkpoints. But when I reviewed actual sample logs, those checkpoints were often skipped or noted as pending indefinitely. We've been backlogged, the section chief, Colby Nash, explained. Sometimes we have to prioritize getting results to clients quickly. At the expense of verification, I asked. No, of course not. But if we're confident in the results, confidence isn't the same as verification. I documented it. I spent 5 days at that facility, then 3 days at each of the other 2 Pennsylvania locations. The pattern was consistent. Wallace Scientific Services looked professional. They had impressive equipment, modern facilities, all the right certifications on the wall. But when you actually tested things, when you verified that procedures were being followed rather than just documented, when you checked whether quality control was real or performative, they were cutting corners, not dramatically, not in ways that would cause immediate catastrophic failures, but systematically, consistently, in ways that would eventually lead to inaccurate results, missed contamination, misidentified substances, false assurances of safety or quality, the kind of corner cutting that lets you process more samples with less overhead. That lets you bid below market rate and still show profit. That lets you grow fast and look successful. Until someone actually checks your work. I submitted all 4 inspection reports to the State Commission in late March. Then I did something else. I'd noticed during my inspections that Wallace Scientific Services had contracts with several major insurance companies. They provided analytical testing for environmental claims, industrial accident investigations, product liability cases. Those contracts specifically required that the laboratory maintain certain accreditations and comply with industry standards for equipment calibration, quality control, and result verification. I sent copies of my inspection reports to those insurance companies, not with commentary, just the reports themselves, with a cover letter noting that these were official state compliance audits, and the insurance companies might want to review whether their contractual requirements were being met. I also noticed that Wallace Scientific Services had several government contracts, state environmental agency work, municipal water testing, federal facility compliance monitoring. Those contracts had even stricter requirements about laboratory standards. I sent copies of my reports to the relevant contracting officers. Again, no commentary, just factual information about current compliance status. Finally, I noticed that Wallace Academy's accreditation with the State Association of Independent Schools required maintaining proper laboratory safety standards. I sent my report to the accreditation board. All of this was public information. Official audit findings submitted to appropriate regulatory and contractual authorities. I wasn't making accusations, wasn't exaggerating problems, wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was just ensuring that accurate information reached the people who needed to make informed decisions about risk, compliance, and contractual obligations. The consequences unfolded over the next 6 months. The State Commission required Wallace Academy to address all identified violations within 90 days or face suspension of their license to operate laboratory facilities. That meant equipment upgrades, facility modifications, complete overhaul of safety protocols, professional recertification of all laboratory staff. The estimated cost was over $800,000. Dr. Wallace tried to fight it, claimed my inspection was overly strict, that I had applied standards inappropriately, that other schools weren't being held to the same level of scrutiny. The commission reviewed my report, found it thorough and well documented, noted that the regulations I had cited were indeed applicable, and that the violations were clearly substantiated. They gave Wallace Academy a choice: make the required corrections or stop operating laboratory facilities. For a school whose entire brand was built on rigorous science education, that wasn't really a choice. Meanwhile, the insurance company started asking questions about Wallace Scientific Services. Several requested independent verification of the company's laboratory capabilities. When those audits confirmed my findings, equipment calibration issues, quality control gaps, result verification problems, the insurers suspended the company's contracts pending corrective action. The government contracts followed similar patterns. Contracting officers couldn't ignore documented compliance violations. They suspended work pending remediation, then rebid the contracts when Wallace Scientific couldn't meet correction deadlines. The company's revenue dropped by 40% in 4 months. Brett Wallace tried damage control, hired consultants, brought in new quality control managers, issued press releases about their commitment to excellence. But the market had lost confidence. More importantly, their rapid growth business model had depended on operating lean, below market pricing, high volume, minimal overhead. Once they had to actually maintain proper standards, actually calibrate equipment correctly, actually perform comprehensive quality control, the margins disappeared. They couldn't compete with established laboratories that had been doing things properly all along. By November, Wallace Scientific Services had closed 2 facilities, laid off 60 employees, lost their 3 largest clients. By February, they were filing for bankruptcy protection. I didn't watch this unfold with satisfaction exactly, more like recognition. This was what happens when you build something on false premises, when you take shortcuts and dress them up as efficiency, when you prioritize appearance over substance. Eventually, someone checks your work, and if your work doesn't hold up to scrutiny, the structure collapses. Just like my filtration project would have collapsed if my data had actually been fraudulent. But it hadn't been. My work had been solid. Wallace's work wasn't. That was the difference. The call came in March, almost exactly 1 year after I'd started the inspections. Kelsey knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's personal. I don't take unscheduled meetings. He says his name is Darren Wallace." I looked up from my computer. "He's in the lobby," Kelsey said. "Should I send him in?" She hesitated. "Are you sure? If this is about the academy inspection, maybe we should have legal present." "It's fine. Send him in." She left. A moment later, Darren Wallace walked through my office door. He looked older than he had a year ago, thinner. The confidence that had always surrounded him like an aura was gone. He was wearing a suit, but it wasn't as expensive as the ones I remembered. The tie was still nice, but it looked like something he'd owned for years rather than something new. He closed the door behind him, stood there awkwardly. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "thank you for seeing me." I didn't say anything. He shifted his weight. "I wanted to talk to you about—" I realized this might seem inappropriate, given our professional interaction last year, but I wanted to discuss a potential opportunity. Still, I didn't respond. "The Academy had to make some difficult decisions," he continued. "After the state compliance issues, we faced significant financial pressure. The board felt that they felt new leadership might be necessary, so I'm no longer in an administrative role there." "I'm aware," I said. "Right, of course." He cleared his throat. "And my son's company, Wallace, Scientific Services, they've had some challenges as well. Market conditions, competitive pressures. Brett is working through a restructuring process." "I'm aware of that too." He looked at me more carefully. "You seem very well informed about my family's situation." "Professional interest," I said. "I like to follow up on facilities I've inspected." Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite suspicion, not quite understanding. "The reason I'm here," he said, "is that I've been exploring opportunities in the private sector. I saw that your company has experienced significant growth. You've built an impressive operation. And I thought, given my background, my experience in laboratory management and safety protocols, that I might be able to contribute to your organization." I leaned back in my chair. "You're asking for a job," I said. "I'm suggesting a potential collaboration. I have decades of experience in scientific education and laboratory administration. I have contacts throughout the industry. I could be valuable to—" "Do you remember me?" I interrupted. He stopped, looked at me more closely. "I asked you this a year ago," I said. "At your academy, you said I seemed familiar but couldn't place me." He stared at me. I could see his mind working, trying to pull something from memory. "Senior year chemistry class," I said. 2007. The student who built a water filtration system, who you accused of falsifying data and blocked from the science competition to clear the path for your son." The color drained from his face. "You told the entire class that I'd systematically fabricated experimental results," I continued, my voice calm. "You filed a disciplinary report that went in my permanent record. You told the principal I was a dangerous fraud who'd poisoned the integrity of your science program." He opened his mouth, closed it. "You told me I should forget about science forever, that my reputation was destroyed, that chemistry was a small world, and people would talk. His voice came out hoarse. My filtration system worked," I said. "The data was real. You knew that. You just needed to eliminate competition for Brett, and the easiest way to do that was to destroy a 17-year-old kid who had no way to fight back." He was shaking slightly. "That's not— I was protecting the integrity of— You were protecting your son's chances at winning a competition," which he did, which got him into Penn State, which helped him build a career in chemistry, which led to Wallace Scientific Services. I stood up, walked around my desk, stopped a few feet from him. "Interesting thing about those inspections I did," I said. "Your son's laboratories had systematic quality control problems, equipment that wasn't properly calibrated, documentation that looked legitimate but didn't reflect actual practices, results that would have been unreliable if anyone had bothered to verify them. The company had some administrative oversights." He was cutting corners and calling it efficiency, I said. "Producing work that looked professional but couldn't withstand scrutiny. Sound familiar?" Darren Wallace's jaw tightened. "The difference," I continued, "is that I actually checked, I verified, I tested. I didn't just look at the appearance and assume everything was fraudulent because it was inconvenient for someone with more authority." He was silent. "You taught me an important lesson," I said. You showed me that the people in charge don't always care about the truth. They care about protecting their interests, their reputation, their family's success. I went back to my desk, sat down. So I built something where I was in charge, where my authority came from documented facts, not institutional position, where no one could dismiss my work just because they didn't like the implications. I looked at him directly. And now you're here, asking for a job, from the person you tried to destroy. He stood there, breathing heavily. I made a mistake, he said finally. I was wrong about your project. I should have been more careful, more thorough. You should have told the truth, I said. But that would have meant admitting your son's project wasn't as good. That someone from a public school with no connections was better than the legacy student you were grooming. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice broke slightly. I'm genuinely sorry. I was under pressure. I made bad decisions, and you're right. You were collateral damage in something that had nothing to do with the quality of your work. If I could go back and change it, I would. I believed him, not because I thought he'd had some moral epiphany, but because he'd lost everything and needed something from me. That's when people apologize, when they need something. I don't accept your apology, I said. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because it doesn't mean anything. You're not sorry you lied. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry it had consequences. You're sorry your son's company collapsed, and your academy forced you out, and now you need a job from the person you tried to ruin. He looked at the floor. The answer is no, I said. I'm not hiring you. Not now, not ever. Not out of revenge. I don't need revenge. But because I don't hire people who falsify data, who compromise integrity for convenience, who destroy other people's futures to protect their own interests. I turned back to my computer. You can leave now. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he said quietly, What do you want from me? I looked up. Nothing. There must be something, some acknowledgement, some public statement. I could talk to the school board, try to get your record cleared. My record doesn't matter anymore, I said. I built a successful business without their approval. I don't need you to clear my name. I don't need you to acknowledge you were wrong. I don't need anything from you at all. Then why? He gestured helplessly. Why did you do this? The inspections, the reports. You could have recused yourself, assigned someone else. I did my job, I said. I inspected facilities and documented violations. That's what I was hired to do. The fact that those facilities belong to you is just coincidence. He stared at me. I don't believe that. I don't care what you believe. We looked at each other across my desk. Your son's laboratories were unsafe, I said. Your academy was cutting corners on equipment, maintenance, and safety protocols. Those aren't opinions. Those are facts. Documented, verified, reproducible facts. If you'd done your job properly, there would have been nothing for me to find. But you made sure people found out. The insurance companies, the government contracts, the accreditation board. You didn't just file a report. You made sure it destroyed everything. I provided relevant information to interested parties, I said. What they did with that information was their decision. Just like what you did with your authority 17 years ago was your decision. He was breathing hard now, angry, desperate. I need this job, he said. I'm 63 years old. The academy was my retirement plan. My son's company, we'd invested everything. Our savings, our house, it's gone. All of it. You told me to forget about science forever, I said. You told me I'd destroyed my academic future. You told me chemistry was a small world, and I'd never recover from having my integrity questioned. I stood up, opened my office door. Maybe you should take your own advice. Maybe you should forget about laboratory work, find a different field. Because this world, it's smaller than you think, and people talk. He stood there, trembling with rage or despair or both. Then he walked out. I closed the door behind him. That was 4 months ago. Wallace Academy closed permanently in May. Couldn't afford the required safety upgrades. Couldn't maintain enrollment after losing their laboratory accreditation. The building is for sale now. Wallace Scientific Services finished liquidation in June. Brett Wallace took a position at a consulting firm in Delaware. Significant step down from COO of his own company, but it's work. Darren Wallace, as far as I know, is working as a part-time adjunct instructor at a community college 2 hours from here, teaching introductory chemistry to first-year students. It's not the career he built, not the legacy he planned, but it's work. I should feel satisfied. I won. By any objective measure, I won completely. I built a successful company. I have professional respect, financial security, authority in my field that no one can dismiss or undermine. The people who wronged me lost everything. Not through violence or illegal activity or anything I should feel guilty about. They failed because their work didn't meet standards, because they cut corners, because when someone actually checked, the foundation they'd built their success on turned out to be inadequate. I should feel vindicated. Instead, I feel hollow. Not because I regret what I did. I don't. Every violation I documented was real. Every report I filed was accurate. Every decision that followed was someone else's choice, based on factual information. But I can't pretend it was just professional thoroughness. I could have recused myself from those inspections. Should have, probably. The conflict of interest was obvious once I recognized Wallace's name, but I didn't. Because I wanted to be the one who checked his work. I wanted to be the one who documented the failures. I wanted him to know, eventually when he figured it out, that the person he'd tried to destroy had become the person who controlled his future. That's not professional objectivity, that's revenge. Justified revenge, maybe, proportional, legal, based on legitimate findings rather than false accusations, but revenge nonetheless. And the thing about revenge, even the justified kind, is that it doesn't undo what was done to you. It doesn't give you back the college experience you should have had, the academic career you might have built, the 17-year-old version of yourself who loved chemistry for its own sake, not as a weapon. I look at myself now and I see someone competent, successful, respected, but I also see someone who spent 2 decades building power specifically so I could use it against someone who wronged me as a teenager. That's a lot of life to spend on anger. Kelsey asked me last week why I seemed distant lately. We were reviewing quarterly projections and I realized I couldn't remember what she'd just said about our expansion plans. Just tired, I told her. But that wasn't it. The truth is, I've been running toward this confrontation for so long that I don't know what I'm running toward now that it's over. I proved I was better than they said I was. Proved they were wrong about me. Proved I could succeed despite their attempts to stop me. But I proved it to people who don't matter anymore, who couldn't hurt me now if they tried. And in doing so, I became someone who sees every interaction through the lens of power dynamics, who trusts documentation more than people, who built a successful business but doesn't have anyone to share it with because I've spent 20 years being careful, being guarded, being someone who can't be destroyed by trusting the wrong person. Last week I was going through old boxes in my apartment and found my high school notebooks, including the ones from my filtration project. I sat on my floor at midnight, reading through my 17-year-old self's observations, the careful measurements, the excited notes when something worked better than expected, the questions I'd written in the margins about things I wanted to test next. There was joy in those pages, curiosity, the kind of pure intellectual engagement that comes from wanting to understand something just because it's interesting. I don't feel that anymore. Now, when I look at technical documentation, I see potential violations, liability exposure, evidence. I'm good at what I do, better than good. I've built something real and valuable. But somewhere along the way, I stopped doing this work because I loved understanding how things work, and started doing it because I needed to be someone no one could dismiss. And I can't tell if that's growth or loss. Tonight I'm alone in my office. It's late. Everyone else has gone home. I pulled up Wallace Academy's final inspection report. Read through it one more time. Every violation I documented was real. The fume hoods really were underperforming. The calibration records really were incomplete. The safety protocols really were inadequate. I didn't fabricate anything, but I also didn't have to send those reports to the insurance companies, the government contracting offices, the accreditation board. I could have filed with the state commission and left it at that. The academy would have faced the same compliance requirements. The laboratory company's contracts would have eventually been reviewed through normal processes. But I made sure it happened fast. Made sure the information reached everyone who could pull the thread. Made sure the consequences were immediate and unavoidable. Because I wanted Darren Wallace to lose everything the way he'd tried to make me lose everything. And he did, so why doesn't it feel like winning? I think about my dad sometimes, about his hardware store, about the way he'd spend an hour helping someone find the right tool for a job, explaining how to use it properly, making sure they had everything they needed. He never got rich, never built an empire, never became someone important. But he was good at what he did, and he did it because he liked helping people solve problems. I'm good at what I do too, but I do it because I need to be indispensable, unassailable, someone whose authority can't be questioned. That's not the same thing. There's a message in my inbox from Kelsey. She wants to discuss a new contract opportunity. A major university system needs comprehensive laboratory auditing across 15 campuses. It's exactly the kind of work we're best at. High stakes, complex systems, lots of potential violations to document. I should be excited about it. Instead, I'm sitting here wondering if I want to spend the next 20 years finding other people's mistakes. Whether that's enough to build a life on. Whether winning means anything if it doesn't change what's already happened. I won. I proved they were wrong about me. I proved I could succeed without their approval. I proved that careful, honest work eventually matters more than institutional authority. But I also proved that I was willing to spend 2 decades of my life becoming someone I'm not sure I like very much. Someone competent, successful, respected, and completely, fundamentally alone. That's the thing they don't tell you about revenge. Even when it works, especially when it works, you don't get back what you lost. You just become someone different, someone harder, someone colder, someone who sees every interaction as a potential threat and every relationship as a liability, someone who won, but at a cost I'm only now starting to understand. It's 2 a.m. I should go home, but I'm still sitting here, looking at inspection reports, thinking about a 17-year-old kid who loved chemistry because it was beautiful and true and pure, and wondering if he'd recognize the person I became, wondering if he'd think it was worth it, wondering if I do. Stories like this happen more often than we think. Subscribe if you want to hear the ones that usually stay unspoken. And if this story made you pause, a like helps the channel grow.